And welcome to 21 Conversations, the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. I'm Shannon Jones, one of the organizers of Greensboro Bound and manager of Scuppernong Books. Greensboro Bound is so excited to present to you these 21 Conversations, our effort to create something unique and special for our community within the confines of our continued virtual environment. 21 Conversations pays homage to North Carolina's rich literary history while broadening our tent to welcome in voices outside of our own microcosm of experience. This featured presentation is but a taste of the 52 authors that we have gathered together for a series of delightful, sometimes unexpected, but always edifying conversations. Since our inception, Greensboro Bound has been committed to providing programs just like the one you are about to watch, 100% free to our community. In order to do that, we need the financial support, both big and small, of readers just like you. Please support Greensboro Bound by giving now. The text to give phone number as well as our website are on your screen. A sustaining gift of just $15 a month or the cost of a single children's book will help us remain financially solvent throughout the year. I also want to take a moment to thank our sustaining supporters without whom Greensboro Bound would not be possible. Our utmost gratitude to the Edward M. Armfield Senior Foundation, the Ruth Lance Memorial Fund, and Arts Greensboro for their continued belief in our vision to bring together readers and writers of all genres, ages, ethnicities, identities, and voices to foster an understanding of writing as a process that allows free expression, deepens critical thought, and helps sustain a culture of inquiry and delight that is open to all. Thank you again for joining us for the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival, and please enjoy the conversation.
Good evening, I'm Walker Sanders. I'm president of the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. We are proud to once again sponsor Greensboro Bound 21 Conversations. The Community Foundation was established in 1983 as a permanent charitable organization focused on improving the quality of life for everyone in the city of Greensboro. Currently, we manage more than $300 million in charitable assets through 700 different charitable funds. It's investing in organizations such as Greensboro Bound that makes Greensboro such a great place to live. We hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation and conversation. Thank you.
Hello, Greensboro Bound audience of readers and writers and lovers of literature. My name is Zelda Lockhart, and I'm an author and a teacher and an expressive arts consultant and educator. And I'm joined today in conversation by Kaitlyn Greenidge, author of the newly released novel Libertie, the story of a dark-skinned, free-born Black girl living in Brooklyn after the Civil War. Her novel tells the story of Libertie's search for autonomy from her mother's legacy as a physician and a healer. And I'm also joined by Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle, author of the recently released novel, Even As We Breathe, the story of a Cherokee young man living and working in the North Carolina mountains during World War II. Cowney seeks to escape the trappings of his home and family life and later attempts to clear his name from the accusations of murder. And so we have some very exciting conversations that we're going to have today, and we're going to do this discussion in sort of a fun way. We're going to use my book and some forms and some play from the book, The Soul of the Full-Length Manuscript, Turning Life Wounds into the Gift of Literary Fiction, Memoir, or Poetry. And so what I'm going to do, so we're going to have a little bit of fun, Annette and Kaitlyn. So you're probably really used to introducing your novels in whatever sort of elevator pitch kind of way that you have. But one of the things that I like to do with authors is to have them to introduce their stories in the way that we all hold stories, in a very, in our indigenous way, from whatever our roots are. We all know how to tell a story. We kind of learn that around age 2. It's when somebody fell off the swings and you come running in to tell, what happened. So I'm gonna screen share with you and with our audience so that we can have some like a learning moment for the authors in the audience. So I'm gonna screen share with you really quick from the solo, the full-length manuscript, these sort of elements of personal plot and indigenous plot, just sort of the elements that are there before we went too crazy and start calling things literature. So can you see that? Can you see those questions?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So and take your time, this is play, so you kind of look at those and you're like, okay, well, my story is about, and then you just kind of go with it, going through the list, telling us how your story is built and introducing your story, your novels. All right, so let's see. How about you first, Annette, to put you totally on the spot?
Okay, all right, here we go. So my story is from the perspective of Cowney Sequoyah, who is a 19-year-old young man from Cherokee, North Carolina. And he has reached this point where he knows that if he stays home, he really is not building any kind of future for himself. It's 1942 during World War II. So he might go to college, and he's had an experience with his uncle Bud that kind of pushes him toward finding an avenue out, like college. So he goes to the Grove Park Inn in Asheville to make some money to give him more opportunities. I was lost. So Cowney actually has lost a lot in his life. His father was killed at the very end of World War I, and his mother died shortly after giving birth to him. And so in terms of family, he's only hanging on really to his grandmother, Lishi. And when he goes to the Grove Park, his freedom is potentially lost. And so he is trying to ensure that he does not lose that completely. And also he has a love interest. I hate to even use the word term love interest because it's a little more complicated, but a young woman named Essie is with him from Cherokee at the Grove Park. And she has her eye on someone else that, disrupts Cowney's plans. Okay. So he has friends and family who kind of help him along the way, but he's not so sure if some of them are there to help him or some of them are there to cause the problems for him. And because it's 1942 in Asheville, North Carolina, in the United States of America, and he is Native American, there are many obstacles that are getting in his way of fulfilling personal success for him. And there are some mysteries surrounding his family that people are keeping from him. Change the quote. So a revelation is that he becomes more independent and has to rely on what he knows of his home and sense of place, even when he's removed from that place, and to pay attention to his environment. So to really assert who he is and his innocence, and that comes about later. What was the outcome of this journey? Do I give it all away?
Maybe that's a spoiler. Maybe we'll say that.
Well, wait, I won't say that one. And I guess the last thing that I'll say is that the novel is told retrospectively. So we're hearing from Cowney all the way through, and we know that he's looking back on his life and giving advice to another generation to learn from his story. So, wow, that was all over the place. There you go.
Wow, that was great. That was great. See, that's a much better way. So sometimes we get into these boxes with like, here's my elevator pitch, and people kind of, they hear it, but at the same time, they don't get to get into it, but the way that we just sort of like, when we used to just sort of like sit down on the front porch or sit around the fire, whatever we were going to do to just sort of tell each other, oh, my story's about, that's more the way that we do it. It's just sort of in us, in our way of telling stories. So thank you. That was awesome, Annette. What about you, Kaitlyn?
Annette, I love that you said that your story is in part about like the loss of freedom for the character, because I feel like mine is kind of similar and also along those themes, and it's such like a rich thing to explore in a novel. So my novel is called Libertie, and it's about a young dark-skinned Black woman. She's born in a free Black community in New York City right before the Civil War, and her mother is a doctor. She's been trained sort of as a homeopathic doctor and also an abolitionist. But Libertie doesn't really want to follow her mother's path. The novel follows her from childhood into her early adulthood. So it goes across the Civil War into Reconstruction. And her story sort of mirrors a lot of the things that are happening on a larger political and historical scale, and grappling with those questions that came up during Reconstruction around who in this country gets to be free, what does freedom actually look like, what does freedom look like for those of us who are at the sort of like bottom of society, like a dark-skinned Black woman. What does freedom look like when so much of freedom in the US is defined by what you can get away with doing to somebody who has less power than you. So if you're in the equation and you don't have any power, what would freedom look like for you, and what new ways could you imagine into being? So Libertie is sort of at odds with her mother. Her mother wants her to become a doctor, and she's not really interested or feels like she's capable of going down that path. And she meets a young man from Haiti and sort of impetuously decides to marry him and move to Haiti and sort of remake her life there. And in Haiti, she's confronted with this question again, because she is in this all Black country in which sort of like all the constraints that she felt in the US are supposedly gone, but it's not a utopia, it's a real place. And she has to contend with a whole other amount of questions around how she's gonna build her life there. And so, yeah, I guess I'll stop there because I feel like I'll give more away if I keep going, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the stories of both of the novels are just so rich, and for our audience. Here's Annette's, the cover of Annette's book, and here's the cover of Kaitlyn's book. Both very striking covers too. There's so much crossover in both of your stories. You have these coming of age, young adult individuals grappling with so many sort of family trappings, and then also social trappings at the same time. And so, there's this way that I want to explore a little bit about those themes and ask you both, particularly around the fact that both are set during different wars, different wars in this, that we have experienced in this country, the residuals of the Civil War, but then also, being involved in, and so, and we've still experienced it, also being in that way that we're also, impacted. The whole world was impacted, of course, by World Wars I and World War II, which is where the time period that your book is set in, Annette. So with that, I just found in the parts of both of your novels that I read, that there was sort of these themes, not just of freedom, but also of like imprisonment and enslavement, imprisonment, and all of these things that I was seeing about movement and lack of movement and restriction. And I just want to explore that a little with both of you and just sort of ask you, for each of you, the same question. Like in your writing of the book and in your research, when you were thinking about, war and going back in history and thinking about entrapment, enslavement, imprisonment, just some of the things that maybe came up for you, maybe anything that you ran into that you hadn't thought about before, with exploring those kinds of themes. Anything you want to talk to us about, that has to do with that, because I'm just very interested, of course, as a writer myself. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind starting this off. Yeah, absolutely. Imprisonment is, a motif throughout the novel. And I've said this before. I didn't actually think of myself as writing historical fiction until I was done, because it felt so present to me with some of contemporary issues that we discussed today, especially around imprisonment. And so one of the touchstones of the novel is the imprisonment of foreign nationals and foreign diplomats as prisoners of war at the Grove Park Inn. And that's a true story. There was, the summer of 1942, the Grove Park Inn held these Axis diplomats and foreign nationals as prisoners of war. And I'd seen an article in a local paper about it, but it was only a short paragraph. In fact, the story was really about something else. And they just mentioned that the Grove Park served as this basically a POW camp in a lot of ways, but in a site of internment. And it triggered something in my mind, because I was very familiar with the fact that some Japanese internment camps were set up on Indian reservations out west. And I've always found that to be a significant commentary on federal reserves for Native peoples. And what land is used for when, and when something is a reserve and when it's a prison. And so I started thinking about the proximity of Cherokee to Asheville, which is very close. Today it takes me an hour to get from Cherokee to Asheville. And how that might work if someone from our community were to go to this kind of prison that used to be a resort. And as I got into the novel, everything just seemed to fit together as reminders of how many different variations of prisons we've had throughout our history in this country. And it really wasn't until I started getting into it, I started thinking about the stockades that my ancestors were put in before being moved west, ancestors of the Cherokee people. A lot of my ancestors actually with the Eastern Band hid out in the mountains. But so my novel brings up, the allusion to those stockades. There's actually a monkey in my book, which is also true, because you can't put a monkey in the Smoky Mountains without it actually being true. But the scene where the monkey is imprisoned and is freed by a Cherokee man was intentional to think about all the different types of prisons that there are, that sometimes are not literal cages like the monkey is in. Sometimes they're called different things, right? Like pre-removal gathering of Cherokee people before, they go on this long walk, right? Terminology is really important. And then, so, when you think about this, sorry, that's the school bell, right? Speaking of prisons, no, I'm just kidding. When you think about the Grove Park Inn, which is, this resort for the upper class, all of a sudden becoming a site of internment, I just find it fascinating to think about how we think about land and who belongs there and when they get to belong there. So those are all the things that, were kind of on top of mind while I was writing.
Yeah, yeah. And it reminds me of what Kaitlyn was saying about, or I'm translating it now for what Annette just said about, who's treated a certain way. And, if in those terms of imprisonment and of even in imprisonment, we have discrimination of who's treated a particular way, who's imprisoned a particular way, and who's imprisoned, luxuriously, and who's imprisoned, and what laws apply to particular people, and all kinds of interesting insanities that we have in our colonized reality. But Kaitlyn, I want to hear from you too about that, those themes of imprisonment and war and freedom and juxtapositions of freedom and imprisonment in your book, Libertie.
Sure. So the book, like I said, it takes place from right before the Civil War into Reconstruction in the U.S. And into 1870s Haiti. So it spans across the Civil War, but the Civil War doesn't really loom that large in the characters' consciousnesses because they spend the Civil War in New York. So their main encounter with the violence around the war comes from the New York draft riots, and less from sort of like direct interaction with sort of like battles or that sort of thing. And it was important for me to write from that perspective because I think that we in America, we love to romanticize our wars and sort of assume that everybody was having the same experience during them and that everybody supported them. But I really wanted to write characters who would be committed abolitionists, but also far thinking enough to recognize the ways that the dialogues that were happening during the war left them as Black women in particular, Black women organizers in particular, out of the dialogue altogether. So especially when, just like historically, when you talk about Black people's participation in the Civil War, there's a big focus on Black men wanting to prove that they were worthy citizens by being able to fight in the war and sort of like die for our country, which I know a lot of people find solace and liberation in, but I wanted my characters to sort of question that whole equation of dying equals manhood equals citizenship equals worth, which, if you're a woman, you're already cut out of that equation into being considered like a worthy person. And then also if you're a man, we're essentially saying like your worth rests on your masculinity, which rests on the ability of the state to maim and kill you. So that the characters in this are that's their sort of explicit or implicit understanding of sort of what's happening around them. And some of them recognize that as a choice that's just part of living in the world. And some of the younger, more idealistic characters really question that and attempt to revolt against that in some sort of way. And so just like in a project of a novel that's sort of engaged with those themes and with those ideas of the past, I did want to sort of trouble some of the standard narratives we have around those conflicts, that everybody was supportive or that everybody was sort of in it, or that it was a galvanizing force in a really specific way, the same for everybody across the board. Because of course, like if we are currently living through a year 21 of a war that affects some of us deeply and has not affected any of us at all. And I think those contradictions are sort of some of the things that I wanted to explore.
Yeah. That's so. There's just those juxtapositions in society. In our society. Of you can be standing in one place, in North Carolina, and what place and land and sacrifice and reward and benefit, all of that can mean so many different things to depending on who's standing on that piece of land. And with that, I want to acknowledge that right now where I'm sitting is in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm on the Occaneechi Saponi land. and to honor the energies that were of life that were that made this place so that I'm sitting here in benefit on this piece of land, wanting what I have and who I am, and also wanting disconnection from my colonized reality. So I'm going to spin it a little bit here and talk about that a little bit, because the book that I'm writing right now is called Recollect, Decolonizing, a Black Woman's Journey to Decolonize Mind, Body, and Soul. And so in each of your books, in terms of geography of the mind, I noticed with the characters that there's definitely the spirituality that is in both books. It's on so many different levels, and the spiritual connections that I feel from the stories, but also that are not explicitly being talked about, but are definitely there in both stories. I want to ask you to talk to me some about that spirituality, but then I also want you to talk some about the ways that your characters are responding to sort of the opposite of that, sort of like this sort of internalized colonization that they're fighting against. So just kind of, if you would play around a little bit with talking about both of those, because I was really struck in your characters, maybe because that's where my head's at right now. But with those kind of things that are going on in their minds and spirits. So yeah, maybe we can start with you again, Annette.
Yeah, this topic was really important for me as I started writing, because I very clearly wanted to upend some stereotypes that are often in Native literature. The biggest being that Native people have some kind of supernatural connection, spiritual connection to Earth and all, and all of these things. And while that is not to say there is not I'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's not to say that there's not a spirituality and a connection, but it's not something that comes because of some kind of miracle of our blood, right? It is an experience passed on because of place, because of our ancestry of place, of what we inherit from our culture. So even as we breathe, in fact, the title itself is from the last lines of the book. It doesn't appear in the last lines of the book because it was taken out in the editing process. But really the whole purpose of the book is to, as a reminder that we make so many decisions based on skin, blood, and bones, right? Those very physical features that all decompose after we die, but the only thing that's left is our human spirit, or which I talk about in terms of the breath, right? So I wanted to look at those instances that we sometimes think are magic and think of them more as spirituality in the book. So Cowney has a few experiences in nature that I wanted to take the reader up to the edge of that stereotype that here's my native character about to talk to some animals or something, right? And then to pull it back and say, what's really going on here? So Cowney encounters a mother bear, for example, that just screams at him as a way to kind of a wake-up call from his maternal family members in a time that's difficult for him. There's another bear that's likened to his father, who can disappear in one side of, it's said to disappear into one side of a waterfall and come out the other. These are all stories that are told pretty casually in his family. And so I think, a reader who's used to those stereotypes is waiting for that Indian connection, right? That he has some kind of superpower. But then I want to compare it to everyone's ability to connect to place. So for my tribe, for the Eastern Band, we have been here since the beginning of time. And if you are a culture that has been rooted since the beginning of time, then of course you have a connection to place. We fought to not lose this place. In fact, we bought it back several times over. And so there's a knowing of how our environment works because we have protected it fiercely, not because we're magic. But other people who cling to community can do the same thing. There are lots of people rooted in these mountains, for example, who have that connection a little bit later than ours, but still understand how the world works around them. Even if it's not a question of time, right? That if you just pay attention, you become a spiritual being in place. And so the only other thing, well, I'll say, because I know there's a second part of your question, but so that's, again, I keep coming back to the monkey, but that's why I bring the monkey in too, because for the Cherokee, the bear is the most closely related animal to a human being. And, there are stories associated with that. And so if you're a bear hunter, for example, there's a specific ritual you have to go through because it's as close as you can get to killing another human being. And that sounds very romanticized, I think, if you say that story in isolation. But then if you compare it to, Western science that believes in evolution and our closest relative being a primate, it's not so far off that we have relatives that are akin in the animal kingdom, right? And we think about those things similarly. So I try to make those connections to dissolve some of those stereotypes around spirituality specifically. To the second part of your question about the colonized mind, definitely Cowney is of that time period where he's gone to boarding school. Boarding schools did significant damage in Native communities. They did some good in some ways. There are people who went to boarding schools that will tell you some of the benefits, but they almost wiped out our language. So you'll notice Cowney's not fluent in Cherokee. He does go to church with his grandmother. Churches, like Christian churches in Cherokee, have been around a long time from missionaries coming in. And so there is that colonization of spirituality. But kind of the neat thing, or I think is neat in our community, is that we've almost created our own brand of spirituality between Cherokee culture and that Christianity, and found the commonalities. And then we just kind of toss out the things that don't seem to ring true. So Cherokee churches are different than some of the Christian churches in our surrounding area for that reason. But Cowney is of that generation that buys into, you need to serve in the military and work away from home. And that's what success looks like. Getting out is what success looks like. And so Cowney really grapples with that along the way.
Thank you for that. That's so rich. I love that by itself is that your response, is like an essay to be explored. There's so much to be explored there, and overlap that I think is true, but I'll let Kaitlyn speak to that. Other things that I also hear that are happening in her story as well. But yeah, go ahead, Kaitlyn. I'll let you go with that question.
I love that. I love that because I found the same thing when I was trying to write my piece, which was complicated because I'm not Haitian. So when I got to the parts that were set in Haiti, I was super aware of writing into a culture that was not my own. And I knew that I wanted to include experiences with voodoo, but I also knew how much that practice is just not gotten right in print, and even researching it in English, I should say, I found really difficult because most of a lot of the translated sources are embellishments, or they're falsified, or they're just somebody made up whatever they wanted to say about something. So I really grappled with wanting to talk about this interaction with this part of the culture, and realize, knowing that I was an outsider and not wanting to get it wrong, or not or make something that didn't feel true to a reader. And I loved what you were talking about practices being connected to the land, because for me, what broke open being able to write about it and think about it was reading some sociologists who study voodoo, and one of them talking about it as primarily a system of health and healing, and that all of sort of many of the ceremonies and the interactions that you're having are you go to, you know, a healer when you feel like you've had a break with your wider community, and that's where they locate that understanding of illness and sickness, and something being needed to have a restoration in their practice. And that lack of community or break from community is synonymous with illness, and that many of the things that you do are either strengthening those ties further or trying to repair those ties, or change them in some sort of way. And so in that understanding, then that tradition becomes really, you know, really powerful, and driven in something based in human interaction and understanding, and outside of sort of myth making or people trying to make stuff up for white supremacist or anti-Black reasons. You know, like when you talk instead about like this is a healing practice, it really opens the door into rethinking and moving away from sort of like the sensationalist parts of it. But then on top of it, some of the things I wanted to talk about in the novel was about you know, this myth that we have in the United States as Black people, that if we were just in an all Black country, all of these things, all these power dynamics would be solved or changed, or easier to bear in some sort of way. And of course, Libertie goes to an all Black country. She goes to the first, you know, all Black nation, Haiti, and she finds that she's still subjected to these, you know, untenable for her power dynamics and power chains. And I was intensely aware, and I wanted to explore for Black people, both now and especially in the 19th century, sort of this internalized anti-Blackness of being in love with the idea of Haiti, and then also being super critical of the country, and especially Black Christian missionaries who went in the 19th century looking to eradicate voodoo and Catholicism in general, and sort of saying, you know, like the thing that's wrong with this country, the reason why it's not working the way we want it to work is because it's not a Protestant country. You know, we have to come in here, we have to convert as many people as possible, and get rid of sort of like this religious tradition to change the course of this country, which, you know, is an incredibly damaging thing. And it's coming from not necessarily white outsiders, but from Black people traveling to Haiti in the 1870s and 80s and 90s, and essentially acting as sort of colonizers of that space. So that dynamic I really wanted to explore, to sort of complicate some of the feelings and imaginations of some of the characters. And it was through voodoo, which, you know, for much of the 19th century and 20th century was not really embraced by the Haitian power structure or Haitian elites. You know, I think in the 19 teens and 20s and 30s, it was considered like a tourism thing, but not really taken seriously as a tradition. And I was really lucky in that I found in my research like a few writings from people in the 1890s and 1900s saying, you know, if we want to be taken seriously as a great nation, all great nations have a great religion, and voodoo is Haiti's great religion, and sort of like this is going to be how we prove ourselves on the world stage, that we have this rich and beautiful tradition. And so all those tensions I really wanted to look at, and they all sort of complicated ideas around colonialism and who is colonizing who, and tradition, and uses of spirituality to survive or to make those things tenable. But for me, it was a real challenge because, like I said, I'm not from that tradition. I'm not from that country. And figuring out how to write about it was, you know, it was pretty tricky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You all have, oh my gosh, I'm hoping and thinking that people are probably really wanting to dive into both of your books at this point, for the ways that they are profoundly unique as stories, and so are the characters, but also in ways in which there's this this connection. You guys have both talked about how there are certain kinds of strife that are that's very specific to identity groups and to very specific individuals here in the United States and in other countries. But then how you know, there's this sort of way to there's this connection of where we're human, you know, and the ways in which both of you have talked about, and even in your novels, you know, made some of those connections of how there's this connection across our humanity, you know, of some of the similar types of things that we might do that are naughty as humans, you know. I'm trying not to cuss, which is my second language. But some of the things that we might do to each other, and our misbehaviors to each other as other humans, or you go somewhere else and you're like, oh, we're still misbehaving that way. We've just switched up the identity group. You know, some of those behaviors being profoundly human, and then also some of the ways that you know, the repair of some of those behaviors through love, through spirituality, through, you know, it's also very human, you know. So you might go to another place or another group of people and find, as both of you are talking, that there has been some hybridization of spirituality or ways to love and connect in community. So saying all that to say, because that leads us to our game. So one of the things that, first of all, I want to just for the ways in which you guys both just offered such a delineation of the social and the individual realities inside of both of your novels so far through this discussion. It's been just beautiful. So I really want to thank you for that. And I want to turn to In the Soul. So this is the soul. So in the soul of the Full-Length Manuscript, there's a warm-up that I do with people, and it's a way to connect across identity, across gender differences, across just us as humans. And so do each of you have each other's books? So I have both of your books. So Kaitlyn, do you have Annette's book? You got somebody book?
I do, but it's in my daughter's room and she's with the sitter right now, so I can't grab either one of those things because they're in my
It's okay. This is just as fun to reach behind you and just get a book, you know. Okay. And I'll show you something really cool that we'll do.
All right. These are all picture books because this is the kids' room.
Hey, so, that's awesome. So I'll show you something that we can do.
Great.
Okay. So on the one hand, you know, all authors were all just like uniquely different, right? Because it's just like, you know, what's my thumbprint? And you only got one, you know. And so when I tell my story, you know, it is what it is, and that's how that ain't gonna never happen again. But then there's also, you know, the ways in which we have some of the same types of the desire to be free, to belong, you know, to be loved, you know, that's just human, right? So one of the things is when folks get stuck, and so this is for, you know, our audience of readers and writers and folks who love literature. If you feel like you're stuck, and so this is for us too. One of the things I like to do is reconnect myself and reconnect the disconnect with another human being. And I do that through literature. So I might reach for somebody's book. And let's say I'm sitting here. You ever have that sort of numb, mundane feeling when it's like, I don't have a writer's block. I just don't have any juice at all for whatever it is that I'm getting ready to sit down and write. And so I just stick my finger in the book, and whatever 3 words I land on, the thing is to ask myself what I remember, because their humanity will charge mine, you know? So, and so this, I'm in Annette's book, and I just landed on, surely she has no idea. And I thought about, this is funny, I just remembered my sister. When I was 9, well, there's a bunch that happened when I was 9 and my sister was 10. But I remembered she would save her money, and I never saved my money. You know, so we would get allowance and I go right to the corner store and buy some now laters. And my sister, she would keep her money. And I admired that, but I also just like something about it just frustrated me and made me jealous, and I was probably projecting. But one time I didn't want to steal her money because I knew the system in our house, right? That if I stole her money, and then if my mother asked me, did you take her money? I'd have to say, yeah, and then I'd get in trouble. So instead I had my brother do it. And I promised him, a little percentage of the earnings. So, but I would never remembered that had I not just landed on, you know, surely she doesn't, you know, she's not aware, or whatever it was, surely she doesn't know. So, so we're gonna play this little game, and so that's the idea, is just to let somebody else's words spark your memory. So yes, it's uniquely theirs, whatever it is they're saying. You're just landing on 3 words. So grab your book and stick your finger in. Okay. Oh yay! Oh yeah. So that's grabbing Kaitlyn's book. What'd you land on?
Oh, you okay? I got it. All right. Louisa and experience. Okay.
What'd you remember?
Oh gosh. Okay. For some reason, this just took me back to college because I knew someone named Louise, and I guess experience of college. So, and I just remember a night where several friends had gathered for dinner, and then we just ended up spending the whole night in one of the university rooms, to the point where we were all laying on top of each other in the floor just talking. And that was just one of my favorite memories from college, that we were just too tired to even leave because we'd been laughing and talking kind of in a big pile in the middle of a university room. It was not like a dorm or anything. It was an official room. So
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. So yeah, I love how this works. What book did you grab, Kaitlyn?
I grabbed my niece's copy of The Secret Garden, and yes, yeah. I wish that I had Annette's book here. All right, here we go. Cherry blossoms overhead. And that makes me think of going to DC, visiting friends in DC. I have a really good friend there who she quit her job about 5 or 6 years ago now to teach herself banjo. And so she's one of the bravest people that I know, because she sort of just decided, I don't like what I'm doing right now, and I want to be a musician, and I'm going to dedicate my life to learning and perfecting my music. And so she at the start of the last administration, she made a pact to sort of go out and sing for an hour every day with her banjo on the mall in DC. And she'd never done sort of like public performances like that before. So that's what that makes me think of, is sort of her bravery, and also just like her dedication to learning and growing as an artist, to do that every day for 2 or 3 years for like an hour, and just really focus on her craft in a very public place.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. I love how through story, you know, just like through breath, you know, we are inextricably linked, you know. So the ways in which, you know, I can tell you a story, or even tell you 3 words, and then that inspires in you a memory, of your story. And so then you tell a story. And even from listening to y'all's stories, it reminded me of things, so then I ended up remembering another story because I'm listening to what Annette was saying. And I remembering being in junior achievement and us going on the first away, trip as a teenager. The first time I ever left home, like, parents, you stay there, and then just all the kids just piling into one room, just to have like this long overnight, just talking and just like really just being free. And then remembering through Kaitlyn's story, being in 7th grade and going to the botanical gardens. Here, I almost said here, but in St. Louis, Missouri, where I was growing up. And then just being there with friends, and some of us were in the chorus, and we started singing, and just anyway, the ways in which we generate more story from story. So that's something that, for our audience, if you all find yourselves saying, I'm just in a lull, I don't know what to write about, know that you have, for every second of your life, you have memories inside of your mind, and those can be sparked by other people's stories. You can also do that with images. So I'm going to share real quick with the two of you and with our audience something fun that I did before we got on the screen. I just started playing with images, and where our book covers seem really different, just like we are, it's very individual, very different individuals. Look what happened when I play with that. So this is Kaitlyn's book. This is from my book. This is from the soul. And this is from Annette's book. So where these look very different, it's just like very different looking, Then it's like, no, actually, wait, did I show the back of it? It's like, actually, no, they're not at all. There's so much connectedness there, even around our conversation, around identity, around breath, around seeking. Look at the two faces there. It just, and then in each story, there's so much nature. There's so much reference to nature in all of these books. So I'll stop screen sharing that. And I want to have just a little bit of time, left for us to, just be able to, just whatever it is, anything that you all want to say to our audience about this conversation, about the importance of your story to their story, anything that you want to share. And then I'll close this out with making sure that we share with our audiences also, like your social media or anything for them to stay in touch. But yeah, how about you, Kaitlyn? How about you first?
I just, I really enjoyed this conversation. I loved Annette's books. I'm just really love the chance to get to read it. And I think this was just like a really nice way to talk about how these questions sort of continue to be turned over by all of us. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel the same. Really grateful to both of you for the conversation today, and to have the opportunity to read Kaitlyn's book, which I think is fantastic. And I may reach out to you again. I like to pull in authors to talk to students when I can, but and Zelda knows I haven't gotten her book yet because of my postal service is so slow. But I wanted to say, most importantly, that I really enjoyed being able to talk to you guys, and in Kaitlyn's book, thinking about how we can use the past, even a fictionalized past, to examine our place right now and the decisions we make now as individuals and as citizens of place. So I just, it always is striking to see the similarities between really the messages that are coming out, even though the stories are vastly different, as Zelda pointed out. So it's just been a real pleasure, and love this book, and I am so glad now that it's part of my experience.
Yay. Wonderful, wonderful. I want to, let our audience know and let each other know how to stay in touch with each other. My email, my website is simple. It's zeldalockhart.com. And then my Instagram is zelda.lockhart. And my Twitter is Zelda Lockhart. so that's how to stay in touch with me. I would love for us to all remain connected, remain in conversation, and continue to build writer community with each other, artistic community with each other. Do you all want to shout out your social media or anything for our audience?
Sure. I'm if you search my name on Twitter or Instagram, all of them come up. I can't remember the exact spelling of all the handles, but if you search it, just my author name, they'll all come up. And my website is the same as my name. So
mine is similar. I'm Saunooke.com because I have the longest name in history. My Instagram and Twitter, or you can just search my name, but it's like Saunooke Clapsaddle or something similar to that. They'll come up. I'm the only one.
Well, that's great. We have to continue to follow and lead with each other. And I want to just take a minute to also to thank Jessica Beeman and Brian Lampkin and the Greensboro Bound Literary Festival for taking a moment to invite us all to be here in conversation, because this is so important. This kind of connectedness, we talked about disconnectedness, but this kind of connectedness is so important. And it's like once we've been in touch with each other and once we've had a conversation, it's a wrap. We are connected. You're my cousins now. So on that note, I want to thank you, Cousin Annette and Cousin Kaitlyn, for hanging out in a literary way with us. And thank you to the Greensboro Bound Literary Festival.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us for 21 Conversations. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like and share with your friends and fellow readers. One final reminder that Greensboro Bound is a nonprofit organization committing to bringing together readers and writers throughout the year at zero cost to our community. Please help Greensboro Bound maintain that commitment with a sustaining or one-time gift now. The number to text to give and the website are on your screen. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you in person next year for the Greensboro Bound Literary Festival.